Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I am the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're very honored to be here with all of you, both in person and online, to celebrate Womanspirit, a celebratory conversation between Ann Olson and Isa Williams on the occasion of Ann's 90th birthday. Woo! We got to clap for that, y'all. This, folks know Anne. Folks who are in our community know Anne. And that's because Anne has shown up over and over again for our community in lots of different ways. And this book happens to just be a great moment to celebrate Anne. Womanspirit is a collection of 20 essays by extraordinary Unitarian Universalists who illuminate their journey of empowerment and feminist evolution. Through poignant reflection and vivid storytelling, this compelling anthology captures the struggles and triumphs that reshaped an entire denomination. It speaks of a shared journey of resilience, solidarity, and the power of collective action while celebrating the courage of brave women who dared to challenge the status quo, redefine possibilities, and transform their denomination from within. And Anne has 2 essays in this book, which is amazing. And we're going to talk about that. When I asked Anne for her biography and Isa's biography, she said, well, I really would like to share a bio of our friendship. And I think this is the first time we've ever had a bio of friendship. And I think it's a really lovely idea. So I'm going to read it. So Ann Olson and Isa Williams have shared an exciting friendship for over 25 years. It began when Isa was hired to teach and direct a program in women leadership and social change at Agnes Scott College. Ann, who was founder and co-chair of Human Rights Atlanta, she was one of the first activists who joined ISA to serve as a significant colleague of human rights practice, instructing students in varying facts, policy, and violations related to the document. They were selected as delegates and human rights educators to the UN World Conference Against Racism and Xenophobia held in Durban, South Africa in 2001. In 2004, Anne and Isa again joined to attend the March for Women's Lives in Washington, D.C., another powerful moment for solidifying their friendship. Over the last 11 years, they have become a book group of 2, reading all of Toni Morrison's novels and essays, as well as works by Audre Lorde and Toni Cade Bambara. Theirs is a friendship born out of the belief that women's rights are human rights and peace must prevail. So we bring that spirit to today's conversation, and we invite you all, if you're here with us and you would like to ask a question, we'll definitely have time for that. I'll bring a microphone around to you, and so just raise your hand. We want to make sure we capture your voice on the microphone. And if you're in the chat, you can just type your question and I will vocalize it into the room. So without further ado, please put your hands together for the one, the only Ann Olson.
And after a friendship of 25 years, I must tell you there is so much that I really don't know and didn't know about you. I was so intrigued by your essays and the stories you shared in A Woman Journey. What a delight to know so much through reading your essays, so much about you that I never knew. Now, let me begin by probing even deeper into your life. I was actually quite thrown by your statement on page 161 that, and I quote, unquote, in the early 50s, your life felt like a girdle we all had to wear. For those of you who do not know what a girdle is, in those days, it was a very, very tight compression garment, a garment that was worn to create the appearance of a flat stomach. Oh, the things women endured. I really want you to tell me why it was that you felt as if your life was a compressed experience similar to that of a girdle.
Yeah. um, I grew up in a white middle class family in a white middle class town. And the town was a sundown town, which meant nobody black could be in the town after sundown. I went to a white high school. I went to a white university. And so it was really, really hard for me to know anything about the larger world when I grew up. And it felt like a girdle. Now, I lived at home during college. My mother was chapter advisor of the sorority I was in. My mother and father chaperoned every party there was. Um, my father was a dean, and he would come over and drink coffee with me when I was sitting with my friends. So I really felt pretty much like a tight girdle. It really felt that way. And my father's famous statement was, and that's the way it is. So in 1962, I got married. Next question.
I'm still thinking about college. And for me, I left home, Illinois, to travel to Georgia, Spelman College. So there was so much freedom. And I just felt as if my whole body, my whole life was free. And that was in 1967. So I'm beginning to understand. It goes even beyond that concept of a helicopter parent. Your parents weren't hoovering above, they were right there, side by side, compressing all that you were doing.
Yeah.
So I will move to the next question.
Moving on.
Of course, I have known you, Anne, as a scholar activist since 1996. Yet your religious journey makes very clear that activism was central to your life as early as the mid 50s. You actually moved to Atlanta in 1962 and taught at Emory for 5 years in the School of Nursing. I'm sure you mentioned that to me, but it didn't really settle until I read that or discussed that with you during this time. During that time, you had two children, one in 1965, one in 1967, and then you left teaching. What happened in the mid 60s that drew you to the Unitarian Universalist Church and the social activism through the gender movement for change in the church? And this was all after your very conservative upbringing.
Yeah. Well, I did want to say when I had little kids that I was active in the League of Women Voters. And that was one of the first times I really started having discussions rather than that's the way it is. And then a librarian, since I went to lots of librarians, the librarian at Avis Williams Library, and Karen was the librarian there, refused to give the names and books that people chose. And that was the FBI, it was a federal law. So, and that's when I became involved with the ACLU and moved on to an ACLU board. But when I was with the League of Voters, I was doing voter registration in primarily Black communities. So it was in Lithonia and in Kirkwood and all these. So it was just beginning to open up to me that there were other things out there besides all white. So that's what was going on. And then you came to, are we on question 3?
please slow down just a bit because I'm taking this in as a discussion. And I'm thinking, here you are, a white woman moving from Midwest at that time, from a very conservative background. I think you also told me that your college experience was not diverse.
No.
It was very a white conservative experience. And so I'm trying to understand how a mind opens so readily as I envision you did to all of these experiences. Question 3. Share with us how and why gender justice for women and girls was so important yet radical as you describe on page 168.
Well, my husband and I went to hear Fritz Perls, who was from, what's the place out in California? Do you know, Catherine? Huh?
And I don't.
Esalen, yeah. Oh. And I had never heard anything like that in my life. It was like a whole new language. And it was at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta. And I loved that sanctuary. You saw people's faces instead of backs. It felt very open, and it felt like a place where you could be and get into dialogue with folks. And I just, 2 weeks later, I joined. I just loved Unitarian Church. And I was really, really lucky to be mentored by the senior minister. And he was awesome for me. He really pushed my programming and my leadership skills. He really encouraged me. And there's a whole bunch of that kind of information in the book, so you could buy it. But
tell me his name again.
His name is Gene Pickett.
Okay.
And Gene was just super friend. Good friend. Hi, JC. So he really mentored me, and I had never been mentored. So it was just such a special feeling. And during that time, and I think it was 67, 68 when I joined, it was starting to be some conversation about feminism in the Unitarian congregations. So I joined Women in Religion Committee, the only one in the Mid-South. I joined the Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation Board. I was chair of the Feminist Theology Awards. And during that period, there was all this discussion about theology. And there was discussion about goddesses and pagan, and there were discussion about things in the world. And then there was a course on gender justice, and that's where that came from. And gender was a word we used in the 60s and 70s. We didn't talk about lesbians. We didn't talk about trans people. We didn't talk about any of those things. They just were not part of the conversation. What we were going for was trying to stop patriarchy. And patriarchy was live and well in the Unitarian Universalist congregation. So that's really where we was dealing with patriarchy. And then because of dealing with patriarchy, we were starting to really name feminisms as important as part of that discussion. So that was what was going on with all those meetings and all those events. And I was then program chair for 3 Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation biennials, big conferences with 500-600 people. And we brought in Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, we brought in Beverly Harrison, we brought in all these feminist scholars. Everybody was white. We were not there yet with dealing with black. That has come much later in the Unitarian Universalists. conversations, but it didn't go on, even though we were starting to read Audre Lorde, we were starting to read Bell Hooks. It was really going after patriarchy. And at that time, I don't think there were more than 2 or 3 Unitarian Universalist women ministers. And now I think, and I don't know if Denise Tracy's on this, but I think now 50% of the ministers in the denomination are women. And the current president of UUA is a woman. So, there has been a transformation in the denomination. And there's some UUs here in the room now, and they probably know about that transformation. And so it was a time of great expansion. And one of the things that didn't happen is we were reviewing and building new purposes and principles for the denomination. And we had written a beautiful purpose for women, a feminist purpose. And it got disappeared. It became an environmental purpose. So we never got our woman's purpose in there. But it was a time of richness for me. It was a time of finding mentors. I had a mentor in the Unitarian Universalist congregation named Mary Lou Skinner Ross, and she would keep me grounded. She would keep me spiritual. She would do what Catherine does for me now. She would just keep my feet on the ground and keep my justice stuff well focused. So, and then Mary Lou became a member of the Feminist Theology Awards Committee when I was chair. So it was a long relationship. And then who else was a mentor? Oh, when I joined the Unitarian Women's Federation, everything felt like New England. It was a very New England organization. And so down here, we have this Unitarian Universalist congregation, and everybody that's come into that congregation was Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian, something. But up in New England, they had born again UUs. They were all UUs. And so it was a real big deal to come up and be part of an organization that felt so foreign to me. But another mentor was Bernita Cogan, and she was from Dallas. And she's the one that fundraised. She was a for the FDA, the Feminist Theology Award. She was a mentor. I would go out and stay with her in Dallas, and she made date cookies like my grandmother. She was Norwegian as well. So all these things were just allowing me to expand my vision, expand how I thought about things, expand how I could deal with things. And that was what was going on in those 30 years. So the chapters in the book are most of the women that wrote, and I think it's mostly ministers, but there are a few lay women in it, are writing about the 70s and 80s and 90s. So there isn't the newness that's going on in the denomination, but I think it is a changed denomination. It has changed. It hadn't changed enough to bring me back. I had been in, as we say, an unchurched UU since 2000. But anyway, so that's that on that one.
Now,
anything else?
Well, and I told you I never experienced a spiritual tradition in which one could explore, one would even think to explore paganism or some of the other issues that you indicated were part of your experience during those years. Was paganism really just about feminism or gender, or was it in any way related to an overall church or spiritual exploration?
It was an exploration, and it was being done by women. And there was Carol Priest, who led tours to Greece, Naomi Goldenberg, and there were just a lot of people. And I have to share with you, I had a whole box full of goddesses and other pagan things. And what I did with them is share them with JC. And I am JC's Aunt Anne. So there we are. So that's it was a phase in my life which was wonderful. I moved quickly through that phase. It wasn't, although I did meet Kay Hagan. How many knew Kay Hagan, right? Kay led feminars, not seminars, but feminars. And we would get together. There'd be several women, and we would get to talk. We tried to read Mary Daly. We took tours. We did the harmonic convergence on top of Mount Aradia. We did all kinds of wonderful things together. And one of the members in one of our feminars was a faculty member at Georgia State, and my children had moved out of the house, so she dressed up as a witch, and she came in my back door, and she had a basket of garlic, and she spread garlic out of all around the house to detox the house from teenagers, and and then when I sold the house, we found the garlic in the corners. So life was getting very much more rich for me through all this Unitarian work. And I have to say that I met Kay at Charis. So that's, and Charis has got their 50th anniversary coming up. Yeah. And I have been coming to Charis since 1974. So it'll be 50 years for me at Charis Books as well. Yes. Is that enough good plug over there, ER?
I really love and appreciate your story as it relates to women and the growth and the activism and the awareness and development of women in the church on their spiritual journey. But I want you to tell me about the other gender. How were men in the church reacting to so much change in such a short period of time?
That is a new question.
It is. And I knew in our dialogue that you would say something that would foster new and different thoughts for me about your journey.
Well, it's not only in the congregation, it's in the ELC community where I live. And that is, I could stand up and offer, or I could be in the meeting and offer a suggestion, and it would just go. And then a man would offer the very same question, and guess whose question got heard? Yes, we all know that. So that was some of the ministers in the church were not super happy with all this feminist conversation. I have to say that, but there were some. I think it was a real struggle, and it's not in the book, but one of the women's groups decided to do an audit of feminism in churches.
Oh my.
And I will tell you that the audit that was done was David Rankin was the minister, and he was not pleased. He wouldn't participate. He said, "This is just insulting."
Insulting?
Yeah. So that's what happened with the guys. They were not happy. But, and maybe if Denise Tracy's on this call and we could get back to her, she's the editor of this book. And she is a Unitarian Universalist minister, and maybe she can speak to that more than I.
Okay. Your journey seems to branch off and actually flourish within countless other organizations seeking justice outside of UU. And this is where our lives really intersected.
Yeah.
As you were doing the work with Project South, the Georgia Citizens Coalition, and your activism, which I so admired regarding the living wage. Is justice work, was it just my perception, not knowing you, but was this type of justice work central to the Unitarian Church, or was it an outgrowth of your own commitment to intersectionality, to looking at race, womanist experiences, moving outside of just gender work within UU?
Well, UUs did a lot of work in that area. We, in the first place, human rights is very much a part of Unitarian Universalism, and then equally so was the what we called pro-choice then, and what we call reproductive justice now. There was a lot of that in the organization, and Jean Pickett, my mentor minister, actually did abortion counseling before Roe versus Wade. There was an underground counseling service in Atlanta, and he was one of them. The other, so that was really fit into my need for pro-choice. The second thing is he was very good friends. They were very, very good friends with Martin Luther King, and their children went to school with Martin Luther King. So, you know, so there was this beginning civil rights conversation that was going on, and Jean was leading that conversation. And that kept coming up at general assemblies all over. At one general assembly, we were talking about pro-choice and the right for a woman to choose. And a very large, tall Unitarian Universalist minister, male, got in front of me and tried to block me from being on the microphone. So that kept going on. But I will tell you, at the big general assemblies with 2,000 people, the moderators modeled such skill to address complex problems. So you can imagine sitting up on a podium with 2,000 fractious UUs trying to get resolution. There was somebody named Joe Fisher when I first going. And then they had one of the first women moderators, Denny Davisoff, who was also the president of the Unitarian Universalists Women's Federation when I joined. So there was all this modeling of change, of dialogue, of getting together. Okay.
Is there, well, I wonder if there's something more you'd want to say about Project South.
Oh, yeah.
Georgia Citizens Coalition. I know they were so central to what I thought you really cared about during that time.
They were, they are, they still are. Project South, I got involved with Project South at a book group. No surprise. They had the author of a radical book, and then they would have somebody who, they would have a scholar and an activist respond to the author to open up dialogue about the book. And that was such a good learning. And so I promptly became involved with Project South. I had human rights training then by the National Center for Human Rights Education. So we did a lot of human rights work. I learned how to do fundraising. And then I was doing, we were at Spelman, Magna Scott, Georgia State, Emory University. We were just all over town doing the work, but Project South has always just called me because of their vision. So, but one funny story, my friend Will Cordery, who flew in from New York City for my birthday party, Will and I were in a workshop with Kim Klein from the West Coast on how to do fundraising. And the Project South mission statement is quite long. So our task was to make an elevator speech. Now, elevator speeches, as you know, is how fast you can describe something from one floor to the next in an elevator. We never succeeded. We did not succeed in making it. So, but there are just so many special friends, and I see that my friend Steph Gouillot didn't make it here, which is too bad. But I do see other good friends. Anyway, Steph Gouillot recently stepped back as co-chair of Project South. So Emery Wright is the chair now, and she's doing political work, and that works. So that's an organization that has flourished. And then the two founders of the organization, Jerome Scott and Rita Valenti, are my best friends. And they are in part of my laughing group, which is 5 of us who have formed nonprofit organizations. Jerome and Rita, Sandra Robertson, who did Georgia Citizens, and then I did Human Rights Atlanta. So we get together once a month. Bird, stop that. You can see everything's going on here. So, so Project South was a place where I could do human rights. It was a place where I met the Georgia Center for Human, the Georgia Coalition for Hunger, because they were in the same building. So I was able to do work with them. And we did Poor People's Day and for several years. And the story about Poor People's Day is one day we're going around the Capitol and the police wouldn't let us in. And they had their guns out. So Sandra and I were up front. She was the director. We dropped to the ground. We'd been trained. And then, but fortunately, at that time, we had cell phones. So we called our senators, and our senators came out and said, these are citizens, and these citizens can come into the Capitol. So we did. Were you in that march, Lorraine? No. So anyway, that was some of the things we did and the stories we can tell. You know, I'm trying to think when it was that I started doing refugee work, because it's part of human rights. So I was on the Refugee Women's Network Board for years, helping them fundraise. Then I was in Women Watch Africa, I went on their board of directors, and Lori Kalenko and I did human rights training together for Amnesty International. We went out to California. We went out to Houston. We did a lot of training here in the metro area, again, at the colleges, high schools, churches, you name it, we did it. And the culmination for me and all this work was the U.S. Social Forum.
Yes.
And that's where Alice Lovelace, a longtime friend, I had done human rights work with her, was chair. And Loretta Ross, who was head of National Center for Human Rights Education, and then became founder of Sister Song, and is a MacArthur Fellow now. Anyway, Loretta was a strong Black woman. Alice Lovelace was a strong Black woman. And the folks from the West Coast tried to get rid of both of them. They wanted white men running the show, but it didn't happen. It did not happen. And they ran an incredible show. For me, I was on the National Primary Board. I was on the Local Women's National. I was, it was like a culmination of everything I've ever done with justice work. And that was in 2007. Then in 2008, I had spinal surgery, and I've been shrinking ever since.
But after that 2007, we actually went to South Africa for the UN Conference Against Racism. And do you want me to ask the question?
2001.
I mean, 2001, yes. Because that leads in to this question. A question I could dare not ask. It only seems appropriate that to explore one of the deepest and most meaningful friendships you experienced with a dear UU colleague, Loretta Williams. And I had the honor of meeting her through you when we were in South Africa. What made this relationship so special and different from others?
Well, we met at Vancouver in the first Unitarian Universalist General Assembly I went to. I was a delegate from the Unitarian Universalist congregation. I was a delegate from the Unitarian Women's Federation. and there was a delegate from one other group. Anyway, it was too many delegates. But Loretta and I snuck off and went to have lunch away from the campus. And we just got to be good friends. And then in 2000 and no, not 2019, maybe 85, 84, 85, we went to Japan. And I was a delegate. And she was a Unitarian Universalist staff member. And we traveled in those skinny little buses, and we were both large women, those skinny little Japanese buses. We did a tour of Japan after the conference. We went to Hiroshima. We went to Osaka. We went to all kinds of really fascinating places. It was a wonderful trip. We really got to be good friends. And then she was fired from the Unitarian Universalist Association by a white male minister president. And then.
And for her as an African American woman.
Yeah.
That
strong African American women friend. And they were just beginning to be wonderful friends for me. So I hadn't seen her until we got to South Africa. And we went to hear Joe Lowry in the tent. And while we were there, African women who had HIV had not been allowed to be at the conference, but they got to the conference that day and they came in banging their pans to get money. And so there was a big fundraising for them. And then afterwards, Loretta and I got together and we got to talking and connected. And you and Loretta and I and her roommate went to a play in Durban.
We were in Durban.
And yes. It was a play where and we were probably the only non-Africans there. And all of those people in the play kept laughing. And we were looking. We were looking at each other. What were they laughing about? Because of course they were talking about the color variation. Anyway, we went to a pastry shop afterwards to deconstruct that event. And then she asked me to become a reviewer for the Gustavus Myers Center for the Study of Human Rights and Bigotry. And I did. I reviewed books, particularly on Southern history, on poetry, on feminism. And it was just such a wonderful thing because, as all of you know in this room, I like books. Yes, yeah. Anybody wants to know what book to read, talk to Ann. Anyway, so we became really good friends through that process. And so she lives in Jamaica Plain in Boston. And my grandchildren were in Belmont, Boston. So after I'd visited my kids, my grandkids, and my daughter and son-in-law, the last half of my trip, I would go out to Jamaica Plain and hang out with Loretta. And then we would have lunch, we'd do our talk. I stayed overnight with her a couple nights so then I could fly home because the airport was closer to her house. So that was just a friendship that just got deeper and richer. And at one point she said, you know, Ann, I really like for you to be your reviews because it really supports my views of the reviews. So that was a close connection. Then she became ill. She'd had a cancer before and they would come back. And the last time I talked to her, I said, well, I'm looking forward to lunch tomorrow. I was on the phone. She said, that would be lovely. She died 3 hours later. So then I got home, and then when they had the memorial service, I flew back up, and it was at the old African-American church up there behind you. It's a beautiful old building. It's where the slaves first met. And so it's a wonderful place. And we had this interesting memorial service, and her two sons talked about her family, and they had grandchildren. Not one word said about her social active. It was sort of strange. That was really tough because I was sitting with a couple of reviewers, and then I at the little party afterwards, a reception, a Unitarian woman that I had known over years came up to me and she said, you know, Loretta said not only was your friendship dear to her, but that my daughter had started taking her to the pharmacy, taking her to doctor's appointment, buying her pants and clothes because she was getting skinnier. So this family connection. And then when her sons and grandchildren weren't around, she would come out to Belmont and have meals with us, holiday meals. So it was a deep, close friendship, like the one we have.
Which I treasure.
Yes,
I
and I
treasure
treasure
our
too.
friendship.
I mean, what can we say?
Yes. It's hard to thank you enough for going even beyond what you have shared with us in Womanspirit. Your life has been so rich. The journey from the moment of freeing yourself from that girdle and coming into a totally vibrant, new, exciting, energizing world, a world that you created in part, not as a participant, but as an activist, seeking new, different, and meaningful ways to bring joy and that social justice, human rights into the lives of others. For that, I thank you. Thank you so much.
And for being my friend.
So we want to open it up for questions for our folks in the room. If folks have a question, you can raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. Yeah, Catherine.
Well, I want to congratulate Anne also for being a writer. So we're all here because of the essays that Anne has written. And as we all know, so much of women's history has been lost. And that time when, patriarchy was really being challenged. And it's so beautiful to see the like baby outfits here about like pee on the patriarchy, to feel that again during what we're facing today. So I'd love to hear more about your journey as a writer and what started you off writing. I think many people don't realize that at Eastlake Commons, Anne was the person who was in charge of our newsletter. So yay, Anne, the writer. Yay.
Well, I loved being a journalist in the community, and I had been at Eastlake Commons for 25 years. I was one of the first people in. So when an opportunity, and this was another mentor, we had somebody in our community named Janet Ferguson, and there's some people in this room who really love her, as I did. And she started the Dancing Fox newsletter because she thought it was important for communications in the community. And then when she was ready to retire, she handed that pen over to me. And I started loving to write and edit. And it was wonderful. And it was a good newsletter. And then and finally I got to the point where I couldn't do that anymore. And so I couldn't. So it ended. And I think I miss it a lot. I think our community could use it a lot. So it was another chance to be mentored. But then the other story is way back with that girdle is I wanted to be a journalist. And my father said, nice girls are not journalists. They are scientists like me. So that's how I became a dietitian, hating a good deal of it for most of my life. So that was, so I was having a chance to write again. And then my good friend who asked the question, Catherine Dancy Water, and I started a little writing group, the two of us. And we would write for 20 minutes, and then we would read to each other and offer, listen to gentle things. She writes differently from me than I, but we really, really had fun doing that. And then she got really busy with her career and finishing up her work because she's getting ready to retire. Then Kathy Klein and I took up, and so we write together 20 minutes, read to each other. And it's just been such an important part of my life. And so I wrote the bio of friendship, and then you edited it. Um, and I wrote a beautiful piece about my friend Loretta Williams, which was not read at the service. So anyway, I just writing has been just such a relief, such a release for me to do. So there we are. Thank you, Catherine.
So, Anne, my question is going to go to the UU connection. This is interesting because I knew the UUs because of coming out way back in the early 70s, and the only two denominations that would have anything to do with queer people were universal UUs and the Quakers.
Yeah.
And that's how I knew UUCA. They would open up their sanctuary for conferences, for other events and meetings, and then when Kirsty started, we were able, which is also a UUA member, not a UU congregation. They also, introduced me to the fact of who those people were. Now, I didn't get involved in the congregation until I moved back up to New York City in '99 because of my parents. And up there, I wanted a spiritual connection. One of the women I worked with at the EEOC was in a Brooklyn Unitarian congregation. And so that's how I joined with them. That's how this is in the early 2000s. I wanted to ask you more because what I started hearing and getting involved in is the repercussions and the new attempt for the UUA to get back into relationship with Black and other people of color within the congregations, but also in society. Because there had been the civil rights movement had been one thing with UUs and how it related to that. But then when Black Power and the Black movement changed, there were some real bad things that happened within the UUA.
Yeah.
And a lot of people left the UU because of it. I'm wondering what do you know about that? Was that something you were involved in as you were involved in Women's Federation? Did that touch on those things that happened in the UUA because of anti-racism and what happened after?
Well, I don't think that conversation really didn't start coming up. When did you say?
When I first entered the congregation was in the early 2000s.
See,
So it was after a lot of this had already happened, but there was a resurgence of trying to work a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that happened in more in the 90s. And that was the first really conversations we started having about lesbian, gay rights. It was the first time we really started to have conversations about Black Unitarian Universalists, Black women Unitarian Universalists. And it really was a very slow growth. The Unitarian Universalist denomination, as far as I can tell, has tried to move with it and has succeeded. I mean, there are a lot of Black women Unitarian Universalist ministers now, and there are many. As a matter of fact, when I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the late 80s, the first lesbian woman minister was settled. So that was becoming part of the conversation. We had a friend of mine on the Women's Federation board who was a lesbian, never came out. So, it was just, she finally got married some years later when she left the board. But it was a conversation that was kind of underground, but it was there. And then it started coming out. And now there are 2 books out about Black women ministers. in the denomination. And I think there probably are close to 50% of the ministers in the denomination are women, and many of those women are lesbian. So, yes.
Hello, well, I'm Charlene, and I'm very glad to be here to hear you today. And I think what I want to say is more appreciation than a question, because you have given me so much opportunity. For one thing, you gave me the opportunity to write reviews for the Gustavus Myers newsletter, and that I enjoyed that very much and got to know some wonderful books as a result. And you introduced me to some wonderful people, such as Isa Williams here, and I met Loretta Ross through you, I believe, and others. So I just want to. You've done so much more than I realized. You know, you really have. I'm so glad to hear all this. And you've just been so involved in so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all that you've done for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We do have an online question. Marina asks, what tips can you share for those who want to write with humor and persuasion?
Okay, I didn't.
What tips can you share for those who want to write with humor and persuasion?
With humor and
persuasion.
Precision.
Persuasion.
Oh, that's a hard question. For me, it takes something like a wonderful woman writer like Muriel Rukeyser. The universe is made of stories, not of atoms. And I can take a piece like that and start writing. So I use a lot of kind of nudges from all the wonderful Audre Lorde. There are just so many good nudges. This is another one, this is from the program from my birthday last week. Although not always a neat timeline, in part because of overlapping themes, patterns, and ideas that stretch across multiple decades, sometimes need to be discussed together. And so all the various topics do need to be, it's a form of intersectionality. They really need to be there for that. So that.
This is for Anne and Isa. Could you give us recommendations, tell us what you're reading next and what's on the horizon for your reading group?
I can tell you one of the authors we've thought about reading because there's something that kind of dovetails with Toni Morrison is James Baldwin.
Yes.
However, reading Toni in such an intense way was a signal to me, and maybe you, Anne, that let's just step away for a minute before we go in to the intensity of James Baldwin. So we decided on Toni Cade, and that was kind of very good because there were ways in which I, for one, was not as familiar with her scholarship. But I think after we breathe deeply in the waning months of summer, we may be able to tackle James Baldwin.
Yeah. We've been easy with each other. Toni Cade Barra. And she actually lived here in Atlanta. She was a really good friend of Alice Lovelace. And she offered a lot in the community. And so we do, when we have our discussions, it's a back and forth. We open up our views of things because we both know different things. And that's the best part of our friendship and our two-person book group. I have another 2-person book group in the community too. So, and we're reading, what is the title of the book, Catherine? It's about birding. It's
yeah, I don't remember it. It's a guy. Yeah.
it's written by Christian Cooper.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting book about birding. If you're, I'm not a birder, but it's just a wonderful. He's such a good writer, and one of the things I said I look for is good writers. And if a writer's not good, we may just say, maybe not.
Let's take a break.
Let's take a break. We're taking a summer break.
In New York, for being black.
Yeah. ER, can you find out if Denise Tracy's on any of the phone calls? She's the editor of this book.
I don't see Denise here. So hopefully we'll send a copy to Denise so she can watch it.
Okay.
Yeah. One last question. What's that?
The Christian Cooper book is called Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World.
Thank you.
Very good.
Madam Librarian.
I know. I love it. So, and just to close this out, getting to 90 is not a small feat in and of itself.
It's true. It's not a small feat.
And I'm wondering if there's anything you want to say about that. What does it mean to you to have attained this special age?
I am finding it. I read Ursula Le Guin, and that's somebody we need to read. She's writes beautifully, and she writes essays. And one of her little essays, she says, it's just so hard for me to figure out why everything is slower. So doing dishes is slower, making the bed is slower, getting dressed is slower. So all those things are happening to me. And since COVID, I have really had to kind of just be in my little house. And I'm lucky to have a nice little house. And my life is getting smaller and smaller, but I have friends. I have books, lots of books, and I have deep, deep connections with my family. My son, who's my oldest son, is my caretaker. And that has been, that has developed into an interesting relationship. We just have come off a week of not seeing each other for a whole week so that we could just kind of rest. And that's been good. And then we're all fresh again to see each other. So that's been going on. My youngest grandson was here for the birthday party, and I hadn't seen him. And the story I tell about Gusti is he's a soccer player. So we know how many goals he makes, but we do not know what his grades are. And he's a rising junior in college. My granddaughter, who's in Europe, having a month's travel after graduating from college, because her father gives them unlimited credit cards. Don't remember that much growing up. But anyway, she graduated with high distinction in architectural engineering. She's going to work for a year, save money, and then go back to graduate school. So my grandkids are doing well. My oldest grandson lives here in Atlanta. He has a master's degree in finance, and he's working in finance, and I won't tell you where.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. So we want to give time for folks to get their books signed and to talk to you more. And I want to let folks know who are watching online, they can buy the book by clicking the teal button at the bottom center of the screen. You can buy Womanspirit right now, and we'll have some signed copies available. So go ahead and click that button. Thank you so much for watching with us today. We really appreciate